Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we finished in the last lecture all the way to Shawwal of the second year of the Hijrah. So we talked basically about the Battle of Badr and then the Battle of Banu Salim that took place right after the Battle of Badr. Now we will talk about the major events, inshallah, that took place between the Battle of Badr up until the Battle of Uhud that took place in the year 3 of the Hijrah. So in today's lecture, we have these issues of there was a plot to kill the Prophet, alayhi salatu salam. That's an interesting story. And then we start to have the beginning seeds of the agitation from some of the Jewish tribes in Medina that want to sort of, not necessarily, I don't think rebel is the right word, but they definitely want to collude with Quraysh against the state of Medina. So that becomes a major problem, which will lead to the expulsion of those Jewish tribes that comes later after Qurayda and all of that. But we're not there yet. We're just going to talk about the initial problems of that. And then what I'm basically going to do is go, just got to flip the page here so I can see the notes. We're going to talk about the major, not the major, but the skirmishes that took the minor battles that took place between Badr and Uhud. That's what I wanted to say. We'll get to the point of the marriage of the Prophet the marriage of Lady Fatima, alayha salam, to Imam Ali alayhi salam, and then we'll talk about some of the other battles that take place in the beginning of the year 3 of the Hijrah, and then that will take us then to Shawwal of the third year of the Hijrah, in which we're going to start to talk about the steps that lead to the very dramatic battle of Uhud, and we'll do a narration of the battle of Uhud, inshallah, which culminates really in the killing of Sayyidina Hamza alayhi salam, which is one of the sad moments of the Prophet's life, and then some of the major stories from the Battle of Uhud itself, and we'll recap that. I hope I can get all the way there with some of the stats, the death toll, the return to Medina, the death toll, and then that will take us basically to the beginning of Shawwal of the year 3. I hope I can do all of that in one lecture. If not, as usual, we'll just kind of spill over into the next clip. But that's basically the game plan. See you back here for the next clip, inshallah. All right, so there's no doubt that the Battle of Badr, as we said, was one of, if not the most consequential episodes in early Islamic history, and it fortified the political and military strength of the state of Medina and the Prophet ﷺ as the leader of that. And now what's going to happen is the reputation is just going to expand throughout the Arabian Peninsula about Islam, about the Prophet ﷺ, about the state of Medina, the force, and really the inability of the Quraysh to make any substantial dent into either the reputation or to the power source of the state of Medina. Of course, the Abu Sufyan and the rest, they returned to Mecca, defeated, demoralized, and hanging around the Kaaba area. Umayr ibn Wahab was sitting with Safwan ibn Umayyah, and Umayr expressed his desire to kill the Prophet ﷺ. So Umayr goes to Medina after Safwan promised to cover his debt and to take care of his family while he's gone. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he asks for his son to be released. The Prophet, because he had been captured in the Battle of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ informs him in this dialogue that he knows through revelation of the conversation that he had with Safwan. So upon seeing that, Umayr takes his shahada. SubhanAllah, he came to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ, and then he realized that this is real. And a lot of these stories, so you understand kind of the psychology of what's going on in people's mind, is that people are of the Quraysh, that is, they're reacting to the reputation. They've never met the man, ﷺ, or talked to him. It's just like today, most people don't know much about Islam. I mean, even though it's on the verge of being the most populated religion on earth, most people don't know anything about Islam, which is, I guess, partly our fault too. But anyway, that's what was happening. So just immediately by talking to him, he realized, this man is a man of God. And Umayr takes the shahada from the Prophet ﷺ. The companions teach him Islam, they teach him some of the Quran, and they free his prisoner. So Umayr returns to Mecca, and then Now many people start taking the Shahada because of Umair. And Umair asked the Prophet ﷺ to leave Safwan because they were best friends. And the Prophet ﷺ agreed, even though he was a co-conspirator in this assassination plot. And the Prophet ﷺ took his turban and he gave it to Umair and he said, give this to Safwan, and this is like a sign of he's safe. The turban of the Prophet ﷺ was about 7 meters long. That's pretty long, so it's a substantial turban. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to have the tail of the turban come down. It's called al-adaba. Tail come down and it would hang between, I can't show you my back, but it hangs between his two shoulder blades. That's sort of the sunnah of the turban of the Prophet ﷺ. Safwan, sees his best friend is converted. He's like converting other people. He says, okay, I need a couple months to think about this Islam thing. And then the Prophet ﷺ gave him 4, months. And he said, okay, take all. It's not about coercion. Take all the time you need, but don't come and kill me and kill my companions. And eventually, Safwan becomes Muslim. These type of stories of the people that want to kill the Prophet ﷺ or hated the Prophet ﷺ, and then he just sort of, has one light touch or one smile or something, and then they convert and they change their perspective, are very plentiful. One could compile them all in a little booklet, I guess, and that would be a good project. Now we come back to Medina to talk about the Jews of Medina. They were part of the state of Medina. The Prophet ﷺ created this political entity in Wathiqat al-Medina. We talked about that. There was a man, Shas bin Qais, who was a Jewish elder. And he came upon a group of the companions, and then he started reminding them of the battle that took place between the Aus and the Khazraj the day of Bu'ath. We talked about that before. And then, he kind of like riled them up, and then they started fighting amongst one another, the Muslims, that is, the Aus and the Khazraj. So the Prophet ﷺ was upset, and he says, how can you revert to Jahiliyyah after I bring the message? And then it was very common in this period of time that a group of Jews would come to the Prophet ﷺ, they would convert, they would take their shahada, but by the end of the day, they would leave Islam. And this was like a way of sowing confusion. They would tell the Prophet ﷺ, Assalamu alaikum, not Assalamu alaikum, which is like, may poison be upon you. Stuff like that. The stories that you hear about that stuff, it takes place during this period. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. So what's happening is that you start to see this social tension, this lack of social cohesion instigated by the Jews of Medina. Maybe they thought that Abu Sufyan and the lot were going to rout the Muslims in Badr and this whole state of Medina thing would collapse. God only knows what the thinking was, but they started to express this type of animosity towards the Prophet ﷺ as a person and towards Islam as a religion. Banu Qaynuqa was one of the strongholds or strong tribes of the Medina state. The Jews inside the Medina state, it's like its own little city, sort of in the outskirts of Medina. So the reason I say state of Medina is it's not just a city, because Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Qurayza, they had to travel to get to them. So these are all regions within what we would properly call the political entity or the confederation or the republic or whatever you call it, the state of Medina. It had republican concepts with representation, and that is compatible with Islam's kind of political science, Islamic governance, the siyasat al-sharia. I wouldn't outrightly call it republican because there are obviously differences, but it was similar. Anyway, Banu Qaynuqa, they were all metal workers, not all, but most of them were metal workers, and they had arms for 700 fighters. So when we talked about the Muslims altogether that fought in the Battle of Badr were 313, and in Banu Qaynuqa alone there are 700 armed people. That's a lot. Right? That's more than double the people that fought in the Battle of Badr. In Banu Qaynuqa, there was a Muslim woman in the Jewish quarter or in the city, I guess you can say, doing business, and her face was covered, and some of the people there, the Jews there, wanted to see her face. So a scuffle kind of emerges, and a man stepped on her gown. So when she walked away, it came undone, and she was exposed. And there was a Muslim man that was nearby. He saw this. he came to her assistance, and in the fighting back and forth, the Muslim man killed a Jewish merchant. So that's very problematic. That's very dramatic. This leads to the siege of Banu Qaynuqa that takes place on the 15th of Shawwal. Remember, post Ramadan, Battle of Badr, on the second of in Shawwal, in the second year of the Hijrah, right after the Battle of Badr was the Battle of Banu Salim. So everything that I've narrated to you right now is taking place in the same month. So now we are in the 15th of Shawwal, in the second year of the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ went to lay siege to the city because of the altercation that had taken place. The siege lasted for 15 days. And then Abdullah ibn Ubay begged the Prophet ﷺ to let him go. Remember, we said Abdullah ibn Ubay was a major kind of agitator figure in the city of Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ left Banu Qaynuqa to Abdullah ibn Ubay, and he asked them to leave the city. And then that's when they all left for the Levant. So Banu Qaynuqa secedes, or not secede because the Muslims, that's not the right word. They leave, they immigrate away, and they go up to the Sham area. And I have many times in my own tried to find out what are the sources that talk about the Jews of the Arabian Peninsula, especially of Medina. And it's very, very hard. I mean, most of the historic sources kind of would be from our sources. I do not know the future of this group, or I'm sure it's out there. My research has not produced anything. Then we go into Dhul Hijjah. So towards the end, a couple of months later, the second of Dhul Hijjah, in the second year of the Hijrah, this is the Battle of Suwayq. Abu Sufyan wanted revenge, so he came to Medina and met with some of the Jewish leaders who were against the Prophet ﷺ. Then these leaders, of the other Jewish tribes, they started sharing secrets of Medina. They burned some property, and then the Prophet ﷺ, amassed people, sent them out on this military excursion, the Battle of Suwayq. But by that time, the Qurayshis had returned to Mecca. And then in the Dhul Hijjah of the second year of the Hijrah, the same month, this is the marriage of Lady Fatima alayhi salam to Imam Ali alayhi salam, which is one of the most consequential marriages in Islam, because it's from their descendants that come all of the family of the Prophet, Ahlul Bayt, Ahlul Kisa, as we refer to them. Okay, we'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, Muharram of the third year of the Hijrah. So now we're in a new year, the third year of the Hijrah. This is the Battle of Dhul Amr. Intelligence reports came back to the Prophet ﷺ that the tribes were arming and marching. So the Prophet ﷺ went out himself with 450 men. On the way, they came upon a man named Jabbar from the tribe of Banu Thalaba. And this was the tribe that they were going to attack. This is the tribe that was trying to attack Medina. And then this man became Muslim. He took his shahada with the Prophet ﷺ, and then he started to guide the Muslim army. The enemy were scared at the march of the Prophet ﷺ. Now the people marching are more than the people of Badr, so now the troops are increasing, even though there was loss of life in the Battle of Badr. But the Prophet ﷺ camped out there in that region for the entire month of Safar. So this is quite a long, if he left in Muharram, and then he's hanging out there and camping out there for the entire month of Safar, we're talking about almost a month and a half, almost 2 months this lasted. So this is a huge episode, right? This takes a lot of time. Even though we're talking about it quickly, point after point, I'm reading from my notes. I mean, you got to think in reality this took a lot of time. I want to talk a little bit about Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf. He was a serious Islam hater. He came from a Jewish tribe. He was handsome, well regarded. He was a poet, and he used this poetry to sort of spread bad things about the Prophet ﷺ and Islam. He went to Mecca, and he started dropping his poetry lines for Quraysh, and he started attacking the Prophet ﷺ. There he swore allegiance to Mecca over Medina, which is an act of treason, because as a citizen of the state of Medina, now you're going against the constitution of Medina. And so the reason we talk and we use these words when we teach the Sira in the modern world is I want people to understand using the common concepts to understand what's happening. This is not just somebody who didn't like Islam, this is a treasonous act to give allegiance to the enemies against Islam. He returns to Medina and spreads lies amongst the women of the companions to hurt them. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, who will take care of Ka'b? He has hurt Allah and His Prophet ﷺ. So most detractors of Islam, they only talk about this one line as if it's like a personal vendetta. It's not. This guy has created an act of treason, and now he's bringing that treason back. I mean, usually when people commit treason, they kind of just stay and they defect. But this is he's like a double agent, I guess you would say. He's coming back. So it's highly problematic. So he was not killed because he just simply said bad things about Islam and he hurt our feelings. He was killed because it was an act of treason. Muhammad ibn Musalama said, I will kill him. And there's a lengthy story behind this, and that happened. And then this sent a clear message to the rest of the Jewish tribes about the stakes and about the seriousness of this constitution of Medina and the body politic that was established. Next, we have the Battle of Bahran. This took place in Rabi' al-Akhir in the third year of the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ went out with 300 people, but no fighting occurred, and this took the whole month of Rabi' al-Akhir. Then we have the Battle of Zayd ibn Haritha that took place in Jamad al-Akhir, so about a month and a half later, the year 3 of the Hijrah. The Quraysh were going north from Mecca to the Levant to trade. This was after the Battle of Badr. So after the Battle of Badr, they could no longer simply go that route because Medina lies on that route. So they're looking for a new route to the Levant. Sulayt ibn Nu'man, who was a companion, he was out drinking, but this was before the tahrim of alcohol. He was drinking with a Qurashi, and as the Qurashi got drunk, he started telling him about the new trade routes that they discovered. So Zayd radiallahu anhu was sent to intercept this trade and to thwart it, which they did. And this culminated in a massive problem for Quraysh, because not only did they lose to the Muslims, but now they lost their trade route. Right? So you kind of have to understand the economic implications of the existence of Medina, subhanAllah, being north of Mecca. I mean, if Medina was south of Mecca, I guess it wouldn't be as big of a problem. But subhanAllah, it's not only north, but it's directly in the trade line. So from Medina, they could basically create some kind of barrier that would blockade the Qurayshis from being able to trade. Okay, continuing with the year 3 of the Hijrah, the Quraysh are busy raising money, trying to raise an army to once and all rid themselves of the nuisance of the state of Medina and the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Sufyan sold his caravan for 50,000 dinars to prepare the Meccan army. That's a lot of money. That's like, probably his net worth, we would say. So that's how serious this problem was. It's not an issue just of religion and faith and monotheism against polytheism. There are some real politic issues behind here, primarily economic. Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Al-Anfal, verse 36, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ لِيُصُدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهَا ثُمَّ تَكُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسْرَةٌ ثُمَّ يُغْلَبُونَ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى رَبِّهِمْ يُحْشَرُونَ. The disbelievers, they're going to spend money to stop the Islam, to stop the da'wah. They will spend the money, but that money will come against them. It won't help them. And the believers will end up being victorious, and the disbelievers will be sent to the hellfire. And subhanAllah, this ends up what happening. I mean, alhamdulillah, radiallahu anhu, Abu Sufyan becomes Muslim, but none of this works. No matter how much money, you can't throw money at this kind of problem. The people of Quraysh, they amass an army of 3,000 people, 3,000 fighters, 200 of them are cavalry, and this time they decided to take their women and children with them. Because they hoped for a victory. They wanted to show that they're all in. I mean, I say all of their women. There was 15 women total, but that's how it's listed in the books of Sira. Abu Sufyan was the leader of the army, and Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anhu, who at the time was not Muslim, but we still, radiallahu anhu, of course, he was the head of the cavalry. Muslim intelligence comes into the Prophet ﷺ on the 2nd of Shawwal, the year 3 of the Hijrah. Okay, so a year now from Badr. Al-Abbas Ibn Abdul Muttalib was gathering intelligence on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ, and he became the Muslim the day after Badr, but he still remained in Mecca. He sent a rapid messenger who arrived in Medina 3 days later, met the Prophet ﷺ in the mosque of Quba, and to inform him about what Abu Sufyan is doing. And Ubay ibn Ka'b read the message to the Prophet ﷺ, and he ordered him to stay silent about it. Okay, so there's this privacy and silence and secrecy, that exists at the time of the Salaf, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So now Medina is going to prepare for this battle. The Muslims armed themselves, and they're wearing their arms even during the prayer. So they're in a state of war, even though they haven't gone out. It's like serious. And this is when a few companions took up the task of guarding the house of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Quraysh reaches all the way to Al-Abwa, and this is where the Prophet's mother, Lady Amina alayhi salam, is buried. Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, wanted to dig up the grave of the Prophet's wife, asked him to desecrate the body, but cooler heads prevailed, if you can say there were cooler heads at the time with Quraysh, and the leadership prevented her from doing this. That's a level of hatred that I don't think we've ever experienced, and may we never experience it. Finally, the Quraysh army arrived on Uhud on Friday, the 6th of Shawwal, the 3rd year of the Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ forms a war cabinet. He has certain visions, alayhi salatu wasalam. Some of his companions will die. A member of his family will die, which ends up being Sayyidina Hamza alayhi salam. And he decides that he wants to stay in Medina and not go out. He thought that more like a guerrilla warfare, we'll fight from the homes and things like that. Abdullah ibn Ubay agreed with the Prophet ﷺ, but the companions that did not go out in the Battle of Badr, they wanted to go out and fight, including Hamza. And the Prophet ﷺ went with their suggestion. The Prophet ﷺ prayed Jummah and advised them to be firm in war. Remember, because we said that this is the day, Friday is the day that they arrived, the Quraysh arrived at Uhud. He entered into his home, ﷺ. Abu Bakr and Umar helped him get ready, and he wore 2 layers of protection. And that's a lesson, it's a common lesson that we use that, to show and demonstrate how the Prophet ﷺ took asbab, took the things that you need to do in this world seriously. He didn't just wear 1 layer of protection, he wore 2. So I'm going to do everything I need to do, and then I'm going to put my trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the Prophet ﷺ came out ready for battle, the companions that felt bad, like, no, let's stay and fight. And the Prophet ﷺ, it's not appropriate that a prophet get ready for battle and then not fight. So he's like, that's it. We made a decision. With azamta fatawakkal Allah. If you make a decision, then go with it and put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll continue the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Alright, so the decision was made. We're going to go out and fight. The Prophet ﷺ is ready. After Jummah prayer, they're heading out. There are 3 units. There's the Muhajirun as 1 unit, the Aus and the Khazraj. So this time there was Tathlith. There was 3 groupings of the army. And alhamdulillah, the Muslims were 1,000 strong. Still underneath the Badr numbers, but if they're almost 3 times as strong as they were in Badr, and in Badr it was a resounding success and victory, everyone believed, okay, we got it, we got this in the bag. So it's funny, in Uhud, the young boys of Medina, they wanted to go out to fight, but they were too young. Right? In the Western world, we talk about dodging the draft. People that are able-bodied not wanting to go to war, and I don't blame them. If there's an unjust war, people of consciousness and of ethics and belief tend not want to fight in an unjust war. But because this was so just and it was against their homeland, it just shows you that we want to go out and fight. They started marching north, and they found a group of Jewish tribes from the tribes affiliated with the Khazraj, but we're going to join. But the Prophet ﷺ refused. They're joining in the army and joining in the battle, for obvious reasons, because the agitation has already started, and we're not sure at this point which Jewish tribe is colluding with the Quraysh or not. They arrived at Uhud and then they set camp. 50 companions took turns, rotating the watch around the camp, and others guarded the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. when approaching Uhud, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he saw the enemy, and then he had 300 people with him. The minute he saw the enemy, he took them and then he left. And then two other groups were going to leave, but the fighting started, so then they decided to stay. The Muslims marched through a particular passage on their marching to Uhud, and a blind man who was a hypocrite was throwing dirt at them, saying, "If you are Muslims, don't pass." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Leave him, he is blind in vision and blind in heart." It's a very poetic statement of the Prophet ﷺ. In the formation of the defense, the Prophet ﷺ took 50 archers and he placed them on a small, like hilltop, mountaintop. I mean, it is a mountain. I shouldn't say hill. It's a mountain, overlooking the battle. And Abdullah ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu was their leader. Their job was to protect the flank and then the rear of the Muslim army from a cavalry attack. So if this is like the plain, there's like a little mountain top here. So the archers are here in case if any of the Quraysh go around the mountain, can outflank the Muslims and then attack them from behind, which is what ends up happening. We know the story. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you stay on this mountain no matter what. Whether we win or we lose, you do not come down from this mountain. The rest of the army was, in three groups. There was the right unit, the right flank, the center, and the left flank. And this was a good battle formation, and the archers got their back and can outflank. And this also from a anterior position, it's going to be strength because they have arrows so that they can fire down. So it's a pretty good. I mean, from a point of view of tactical point, I'm not a military tactician, but if I could say so myself, having no background, it sounds like a pretty good, solid formation. And that's what the books tell us, and that's what the ulama of the Sira tell us. So I'm going to go with it. The Prophet ﷺ warms up the troops, right? There's this, battle is a serious thing. We in American culture we say game day. This is game day on steroids. This is serious stuff. So you got to kind of have that motivation. So the Prophet ﷺ, who will take this sword from me by its right? Who's going to be true to this sword today? And Abu Dujana steps up and says what the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet and the Abu Dujana steps up. He said, "What is it? What does that mean? What is the right of this sword?" And the Prophet ﷺ, "You fight with this sword until its blade bends." Right? Those are fighting words, right? That's that lifts you. It doesn't like if you don't worry, you're gonna die. No, it's like who's gonna do right by this sword. What does that mean? Abu Dujana says, "What do you mean? Fight until it bends. Fight until it breaks. Fight until you're out of ammo. Fight until you're just fighting with your teeth and your nails. You got nothing. You're going all in because you're defending your wife, your sister, your daughter, your neighbors, your Prophet ﷺ, your deen, your home. Everything's online. There's nothing else. That's all they got. They left Mecca, we said, to go to Medina to avoid all of this." Before the battle, the Quraysh, they send messages to the Ansar to leave the Prophet ﷺ so they can fight. They're like, "Our business is not with you, it's with the Prophet ﷺ." And this emphasizes something I think I mentioned a couple lessons ago, that you got to understand that a lot of these tensions were a family tension. It's because the Prophet ﷺ split off from the tribe of Quraysh and is now ruining their reputation. So it's not like they're fighting all of Medina. They only want to fight the Prophet ﷺ. But they didn't understand that. One hypocrite deserted the army. And then the Quraysh were like, "Great, we hope this has an impact." It doesn't have an impact. I mean, good. The Muslims are good riddance. You weren't with us to start out with. And the women that the Quraysh brought with them were also encouraging their men to fight. Then the battle begins. We said it traditionally starts with a duel. Zubayr beats Talha ibn Abi Talha, who was a feared Meccan. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Every prophet has a disciple, and my disciple is Zubayr radiallahu anhu." And then they start fighting, and the Muslims in this initial skirmish win, but Hamza is killed, and we know that Hamza alayhi salam is killed by Wahshay radiallahu anhu, who ends up becoming Muslim, who was hired by Hind to kill him, and Wahshay ends up making tawbah. It's actually a very moving story. Wahshay ends up making tawbah later, and he comes and he declares his Islam to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ said he accepted his Islam, and he said, "Raghib anni wajhak." I don't want to see your face. Just so Wahshay said, from that moment on until the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, I did everything I could so the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't see me. Wahshay becomes a soldier and serves in the armies of the Khulafa, ends up in Damascus. And during the battle with Musaylama, the liar, the false prophet in the Najd area, in the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula, he kills Musaylama with that same spear. And he said, "This spear I killed the best of people with it," meaning Hamza alayhi salam, "and I killed the worst of people." And he took to the bottle, as we say in English. He was an alcoholic, and he died alone. He was kicked out of the army because he was drinking, and he died alone in Damascus. And when Umar radiallahu anhu heard about that, he said, "That's what I assumed would happen with the person who killed Hamza." So subhanallah, Islam yujubu ma qablahu. Islam washes away the previous sins, but that's a sin of epic proportion, because you're hired to kill a warrior and a leader, and it's sort of like it leaves like a spiritual impact on you. Of course, you're not damned, but in this case it was, and I just think it's a moving story. He was radiallahu anhu, he was a Muslim, and inshallah Allah forgave him and everything, but he had his weaknesses. There was an intense fighting in the Battle of Uhud. Despite the losses, the Muslims remained with the upper hand. The Quraysh lose their flag, which is a big deal. So some stats on that. Talha ibn Abi Talha, who was killed by Zubair, he had the flag, and then when he fell in the duel, the flag was carried by 5 members of the same family. They all died, and then a sixth, and after that, after these 6, Talha and the 5 members of the family, a slave from the Quraysh picked up the flag. He was killed, and then the flag was lost. So that's a bad omen. When the flag is lost in pre-modern warfare, forgive me for saying this, you're screwed. That means that there's no order, there's no direction in battle. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to be able to get into the other stories. But sometimes we refer to Uhud as a loss. It's not really a loss, because the Muslims won in the battle. But the descent of the archers down to the plain and disobeying the Prophet ﷺ, and then Khalid ibn Walid being able to take the cavalry around the mountain to outflank the Muslims and attack them from behind, that's what and caused the disarray. I guess statistically we would say it was a draw. Let me look quickly at the numbers. Yeah, the Muslims lost 70 and the Quraysh lost 37. So if we said before that we mark defeat and victory by the stats, from that point of view the Muslims lost. And it's really due to this tragic event of the archers after the initial victory, and that we will pick up in our next clip, our next lesson, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. All right, in today's class, we did a lot actually. We were able to talk about the major incidences and issues that happened between the Battle of Uhud and the Battle of Badr. Largely, a lot of that is the emergence of the agitation that happens from some of the Jewish tribes, not all of the Jewish tribes. The most dramatic in this period is that of Banu Qaynuqa, which leads to the siege of Banu Qaynuqa, and then the Prophet ﷺ allowing them to leave. And they leave. They leave voluntarily. Sometimes authors will say they're expelled. They weren't expelled because they chose to leave. They could have stayed if they repented and they renewed their allegiance. So it's not that they were forced to leave. I think that would be a very inaccurate and unjust way of referring to it. They left. They voluntarily left, and they fled to the Levant, and they just kind of are subsumed into the Shami culture after that. And the defeat of the Quraysh in the Battle of Badr leaves a huge problem for them. Part of the problem is that the Muslims are able to block the trade routes, even the new trade routes of the Quraysh from Mecca to the Sham, which is essential for their livelihood and their survival. And this is really what leads to the Battle of Uhud. Abu Sufyan uses most of his money, if not all of it, to amass 3,000 force. They go and they meet at the Battle of Uhud. The Prophet ﷺ goes out to meet them. And we said the way that the battle was formed is that there was this mountaintop when there were the 50 archers. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you don't descend no matter what, whether we win or we lose, you remain here so that we're not outflanked and attacked from behind. And of course, we didn't get to this point, but obviously they don't listen. And that's why it ends up statistically being a defeat. Those are the main things that we talked about. Let me just pick up if there's anything else. We talked about the plot in the beginning to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and we talked about Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, who was this Jewish poet who defected and used the defection to curse Islam and the Prophet ﷺ. And I talked about how sometimes some historians misattribute the killing of him, that kind of he like hurt our feelings, but it's not about that he hurt our feelings, it's that he defected. And those type of adjustments I hope we can make together when we talk about the seerah, so we conclude the right things. Those are the major things we talked about. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.